The first time my father tried to take my daughter from me, he did it wearing a navy suit and a grandfather's smile. "Your Honor," he said, folding his hands like he was about to lead a prayer instead of ruin a life, "I love my daughter. I always will. But love doesn't blind me to facts. Emma is not safe with Claire." My knees nearly gave out. I was sitting at the other table in the Franklin County family courtroom with a legal aid attorney I'd known for 11 days, staring at the same man who used to check the windows at night to make sure my mother hadn't gotten any ideas about leaving him. He didn't look like a monster. That was the problem. He looked respectable. Silver hair trimmed close. Wedding band still on, though my mother had been dead 10 months. Bible on the chair beside him. A tissue folded in his breast pocket for effect. He had spent his whole life learning how to look like the injured party while someone else bled. The judge, a heavy-set man named Hollis with tired eyes and a patient voice, held up a thick photo album my father's lawyer had entered into evidence. "This is Petitioner's Exhibit 12? My father nodded. "Photos of my home, family gatherings, my bond with Emma." Judge Hollis opened the album, turned 2 pages, then stopped. Something had caught in the spine. He tugged gently, and a yellowed envelope slid halfway out from the torn binding and landed on the bench. The whole room changed. My father went still. Not startled. Not confused. Still. Judge Hollis picked up the envelope, frowned at the faded writing across the front, and looked over his glasses. "Counsel," he said quietly, "can either of you explain why this appears to be addressed in the handwriting of the respondent's deceased mother?" I couldn't breathe, because even from where I sat, I knew that slanted capital M. It was my mother's handwriting. And I had watched my father burn her journals in a steel trash barrel when I was 17. If you're enjoying stories about real-life challenges, personal growth, and unforgettable life lessons, consider subscribing to the channel. New stories are released regularly, and you won't want to miss the next one. My name is Claire Bennett, and until last year, I believed the hardest thing I would ever do was raise my daughter alone. I was wrong. The hardest thing I ever did was prove that love could look messy and exhausted and underfunded and still be real, while cruelty could look calm and organized and wear expensive shoes. Emma was 7 when all of this happened. She had a gap between her front teeth, a soft voice that got louder when she was excited, and a habit of asking hard questions at the exact moment adults wanted to lie. She loved strawberry yogurt, thunderstorms from inside the house, and books about girls who rescued wild horses. She slept with the same stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3, even though one ear had gone limp after too many washes. Her father, Mason, had been gone for most of her life. Not dead. Not noble. Just gone. He had drifted out in installments, the missed child support, the cancelled weekends, the promises that dissolved as soon as they left his mouth. By the time Emma was 5, she stopped asking when he was coming. That silence broke something in me worse than any fight we ever had. So it was me. Me getting her ready for school before sunrise. Me braiding hair while answering billing emails on my phone. Me working weekdays for a small physical therapy office doing insurance claims and taking diner shifts on Saturdays when my neighbor Tasha could watch Emma. Me stretching one rotisserie chicken into 3 dinners and pretending that pancakes at night were a fun choice and not what happens when payday is still 2 days away. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment over a laundromat on the east side of Columbus. The floor slanted a little toward the kitchen, and the radiator clanked like it had opinions, but it was clean. It was warm. It was ours. Most nights, after Emma fell asleep, I'd sit at the tiny kitchen table under the yellow light above the stove and make lists: rent, school shoes, inhaler refill, gas bill, dentist appointment, field trip money. Survival came down to lists. You kept writing them because stopping felt too much like giving up. My mother, Diane, used to call me around 9:30 every night. Just to hear my voice for a minute, she'd say. Sometimes she asked about Emma. Sometimes she asked whether I was eating enough. Sometimes she said nothing important at all. Looking back, I think those calls were her way of checking that I was still there. Still standing. Still not swallowed by the kind of life women in our family had a habit of surviving quietly. Then she died on a Thursday morning in March while folding towels in her laundry room. Massive stroke, the doctor said. Quick. Merciful, people said. There are words people use when they don't know what else to do with your pain. My father, Victor Bennett, stood beside me at the funeral home greeting guests like he was hosting a respectable tragedy. He shook hands. He accepted casseroles. He cried at exactly the right moments. He held Emma on his lap during the service, and she leaned into him because children don't know history when it's smiling at them. I hadn't spoken to him for almost a year before Mom died. Before that, I kept contact thin and careful, mostly for her. Holiday phone calls. Short visits. Never alone if I could help it. He had never hit me the way men in movies do, wild and obvious, leaving marks other people would notice. He was more skilled than that. He specialized in control. He could turn silence into punishment. Kindness into debt. Generosity into ownership. When I was 12, I forgot my choir folder at school and he made me stand in the garage for an hour to think about responsibility. When I was 15, he read my diary and grounded me for what he called disloyal thoughts. When I was 17, he slapped the wall beside my head so hard the framed family picture fell, because I told him he couldn't speak to my mother the way he did in front of me. The night I left home, I packed a duffel bag and slept on Tasha's older sister's couch for 3 weeks. My mother met me for coffee twice during that time and cried into napkins while insisting she was working on things. She never left him. At least not fully. Now she was dead, and he was suddenly a grandfather in public. At the repast, he crouched beside Emma and handed her a little box with a silver charm bracelet inside. Your grandma wanted you to have something pretty, he said. Emma looked at me before taking it. She always did that when another adult offered something. It broke my heart and made me proud at the same time. Say thank you, I whispered. Thank you, she said softly. Victor smiled at her, but his eyes flicked up to me. You should come by the house sometime. Both of you. No reason for family to drift apart now. Now. As if grief should have made me forget what I'd spent 20 years remembering. I said, we'll see. He touched my elbow. Claire, you don't have to do everything alone. That sentence would have sounded kind from almost anyone else. From him, it sounded like a door clicking shut. For the first couple of months after Mom died, he played the long game. He didn't push. He appeared. A bag of groceries on my porch with no note. A text asking if Emma needed school supplies. A voicemail saying he was in the area and could drop off a desk he no longer used. I should have ignored him. I know that now. But grief makes you tired in strange places. It softens boundaries you used to guard with your life. And the truth is, I missed my mother so badly that when he talked about her, even carefully, it felt like standing near a fire in winter. Not safe. Just warm enough to confuse me. Then my car transmission died in July. I was in the pickup line at Emma's summer reading program when the engine gave one ugly shudder and refused to move. I had $98 in checking until Friday. The shop estimate came back at $1,800. I sat on the curb outside the garage and laughed the way people laugh when crying would take too long. That night, Tasha found me at the kitchen table staring at the estimate. You need help, she said. I know. Real help. I rubbed my eyes. Please don't say my father. I wasn't going to, she said. I was going to say start a fundraiser and let me bully half the neighborhood into pretending they weren't already thinking about it. I smiled despite myself. Tasha Ruiz had lived across the hall from me for 4 years. She was 39, loud in the best possible way, and the closest thing I had to family that didn't come with conditions. She worked nights at a hospital switchboard, wore her hair in a messy bun that never actually looked messy, and treated Emma like a niece. You know what he'll do if I ask, I said. Then don't ask. But I didn't have to. 2 days later, Victor called. I heard about the car, he said. I froze. How? Small town truth, privacy is mostly a rumor with better marketing. People talk, he said. I can cover it. No. Claire. No. A pause. Then a sigh designed to sound wounded. You are still so determined to make struggle into a virtue. I should have hung up. Instead I said, I'm determined not to owe you. That's childish. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had softened. Let me do one thing for my granddaughter. He knew exactly which word to use. Emma. Not me. Never directly me. By the end of that week, he had paid for the repair shop himself. Said it was a loan. Refused paperwork. Called it family. I told myself I'd pay him back in installments. I told myself taking help once didn't mean inviting him into our lives. I told myself a lot of things that summer. At first, Emma loved visiting his house. Of course she did. He lived in the big brick place I grew up in, with the wide porch swing and the backyard big enough to run in. He bought a golden retriever after Mom died. He let Emma pick tomatoes from the garden. He had central air that actually worked and a freezer full of popsicles and a guest room he started referring to as Emma's room after putting a white quilt on the bed. The first time she said it to me, I almost ran a red light. Grandpa says I can keep my books there, she chirped from the back seat. I looked at her in the mirror. His guest room is not your room, honey. She blinked. Oh. Okay. Kids don't hear the warning behind our tone. They hear only the sharpness. I softened my voice. You can visit Grandpa. That's fine. But home is home. She nodded, but I could tell I had turned something heavy in the air. That night, while brushing her teeth, she asked, Why don't you like Grandpa's house? I stood behind her at the sink, watching her in the mirror. Who said I don't? You always get quiet when I talk about it. There it was. The price children pay for our history. They grow up learning our silences before they understand our words. I used to live there, I said carefully. And not all my memories from that house are good. Emma spat toothpaste into the sink. Did Grandpa yell a lot? My hand stopped on her shoulder. Why would you ask that? She shrugged, suddenly interested in the faucet. He yelled at the dog because it chewed his slipper. Then he said sorry after. My chest tightened. What kind of yell? She looked up at me. A scary one. I turned off the faucet. Did he yell at you? No. Did he grab you? No. Did he make you feel afraid? She thought about it. Not me. I tucked her into bed and sat beside her longer than usual, listening to her breathe until she fell asleep. Then I went into the bathroom, shut the door, and put both hands on the sink until the shaking stopped. The next morning, I called Victor. No more alone visits for a while, I said. His voice went flat. Because the dog chewed my shoe? Because Emma said you yelled. For God's sake, Claire, parents raise their voices. Grandparents too. That's not abuse. I hadn't used that word. I didn't say it was. You implied it. I'm setting a boundary. And I'm telling you you're being ridiculous. There it was. Not the shouting, not yet. Just the old familiar tone that meant my reality was being revised in real time. She's my daughter, I said. And she's my granddaughter. I kept my voice even. A supervised lunch on Sunday. At the park. He laughed once under his breath. You really think you can rewrite this family into something where I need your permission? I hung up. 3 days later, Child Protective Services knocked on my door. The caseworker's name was Naomi. She was young, kind-eyed, and looked as tired as every woman I knew who spent her days cleaning up damage other people made. She said they'd received an anonymous report that Emma was being left alone for long periods, that the apartment was unsanitary, and that I often failed to provide necessary medication for her asthma. I almost fainted from pure rage. "Come in," I said. The apartment was cluttered because life was happening in it. There were crayons on the coffee table and 2 grocery bags by the counter I hadn't unpacked yet. But there was food in the fridge. Clean sheets on the beds. Emma's inhaler in the kitchen drawer and the backup one in my purse. Naomi checked them both. Emma sat on the couch hugging her rabbit and answered questions in a voice so polite it hurt me. "Does Mommy leave you alone?" "No." "What do you do when you feel sick?" "Tell Mommy or Ms. Tasha." "Do you have enough to eat?" Emma looked confused. "I had macaroni yesterday." Naomi closed her notebook after 20 minutes and gave me the look women give each other when the paperwork says one thing and the truth says another. "I don't see grounds for concern," she said quietly at the door. "But there will still be a file." I laughed bitterly. "Of course there will." Her expression softened. "Do you know who made the call?" "No." "Yes." "No proof." "I have an idea," I said. After she left, I sat on the couch and pulled Emma into my lap, even though she was getting almost too big for it. "Am I in trouble?" she whispered. I kissed her hair. "No, baby. Absolutely not." "Then why was that lady here?" "How do you explain adult malice to a child without handing them your fear?" "Sometimes people who don't know the whole story make bad choices," I said. She was quiet. "Was it Grandpa?" I pulled back and looked at her. "Why would you think that?" She stared at the frayed ear of her rabbit. "Because he asked me last week where you keep my medicine. And if I'm ever by myself after school." I went cold all over. That evening, Victor sent me a text. "Heard about the CPS visit. I'm sorry you're going through this. If you need Emma to stay with me while things settle down, my door is open." That was the moment I knew. Not suspected. Knew. I didn't answer. I took screenshots, sent them to myself, and sat at the table until Tasha came over with takeout and found me staring at nothing. "He's laying groundwork," she said after reading the message. I looked at her. "You think he'd really do it?" Tasha's mouth tightened. "I think men like your father don't age out of control. They just get better furniture." I laughed once, and then I cried so hard I couldn't talk. The custody papers arrived on a Tuesday. Not in the mail. Hand-delivered by a process server who knocked while I was helping Emma with spelling words. "Claire Bennett?" "Yes?" He handed me the envelope. "You've been served." Emma looked up from the table. "What's that?" "Nothing, honey." My fingers were already numb. "Go wash your hands for dinner." I waited until she was in the bathroom before opening it. Petition for third-party custody. Petitioner, Victor Bennett, maternal grandfather. Allegations of neglect, instability, emotional unfitness, unsafe living conditions, repeated childcare lapses, concerning mental health patterns, failure to provide consistent medical management, exposure of child to unknown adult males. I had to sit down. There was an affidavit from Mason, my daughter's father, who hadn't shown up for her school play but somehow found time to swear under oath that I was prone to emotional outbursts and had struggled to maintain a stable environment for Emma. I read that sentence 3 times because it felt impossible that ink on paper could burn. At the bottom of the petition, Victor requested temporary emergency placement pending a full hearing. He wanted her now. Not later. Not someday. Now. Emma came back to the table carrying her pencil. "Mom?" I folded the papers so fast I nearly tore them. "What?" "You look sick." I swallowed. "I just got some bad news from work." She accepted that because children want to believe the adults holding their world together are still strong enough to keep holding. That night, after she fell asleep, I called every legal aid number I could find. Most had wait lists. One line disconnected after 47 minutes. I finally got through to a woman named Angela Price at a county family advocacy office who listened without interrupting and then said, "Come in tomorrow at 9. Bring everything." Angela was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, and had the posture of someone perpetually braced against nonsense. She wore no-nonsense flats and read my paperwork with the speed of a person who had seen too many lives reduced to binders. "Third-party custody is a high bar," she said. "Grandparents don't just get a child because they have more money or a nicer house. But judges are human. Paper matters. Documentation matters. If he can paint a picture of chronic instability and concern for Emma's welfare, we have to dismantle it piece by piece. I'm not unfit. I know that. The question is whether we can prove it fast enough." She flipped to Mason's affidavit. When was the last time her father exercised visitation? 8 months. Paid support? Not consistently. She made a note. Good. He'll fold under pressure if he's lying. I let out a breath that felt like splintered wood. "You think my father put him up to this?" Angela gave me a long look. "People rarely go after custody for the reasons they write down." We filed our response. We requested the source materials behind the allegations. We subpoenaed school records, medical records, attendance logs, text messages. Angela told me to keep every interaction with Victor in writing if possible. No calls. No face-to-face unless necessary. If he came near my apartment, document it. "This is not just about being a good mother anymore," she said. "It's about building a case that will survive a bad narrative." My father's narrative was excellent. Within a week, the school counselor had been contacted by his attorney. Emma's teacher received a request for notes about late pickups. My landlord suddenly remembered 2 noise complaints from months earlier, both from the downstairs tenant who'd blasted music until 2 in the morning and then blamed my child for running. A pediatric urgent care record from the winter, when Emma had a bad cough and I brought her in after work, was reframed as delayed medical attention. Everything ordinary in a struggling parent's life was being sharpened into evidence. I started sleeping in fragments. At work, I double-checked claims and still made mistakes. My boss, Kevin, called me into his office one Friday and shut the door with the careful expression of a decent man about to say something hard. "Claire," he said, "if you need time off for court, take it." I stared at him. "I can't afford to." "You also can't afford to lose your kid because you're trying to pretend you're fine." My throat tightened. "I'm not trying to pretend. I'm trying not to fall apart on company time." He leaned back in his chair. "For what it's worth, you're one of the steadiest people here." That small kindness nearly undid me more than cruelty ever did. At the first temporary hearing, the judge did not remove Emma from me. That was the good news. The bad news was that he set a full evidentiary hearing 6 weeks out and appointed a guardian ad litem to investigate. Until then, Victor would have weekly visitation, and everyone would cooperate with the evaluation process. When we stepped into the hallway, Victor caught up with me near the vending machines. Angela had gone to make a copy of something. For 10 seconds, it was just him and me. He smiled gently enough that anyone passing by would think he was comforting his daughter. "You look worn out," he said. I stared at him. "You filed for custody of my child." "I filed to protect my granddaughter." "From what?" "From your pride. Your instability. The chaos you insist on calling independence." I felt the blood rush to my face. "You made a CPS report." "You can't prove that." "No, but I know it." He lowered his voice. "Then know this too. If you had simply accepted help, none of this would be happening. There are some sentences that tell the truth by accident." "If I had obeyed you," I said. His jaw ticked. "You always did prefer ugly words." Angela returned then, and Victor stepped back into his performance. He touched my shoulder. I'm praying for healing in this family. I wanted to scream. Instead, I walked away before he could see how badly my hands were shaking. The guardian ad litem assigned to Emma was a woman named Marcy Klein. She came to the apartment with a legal pad and sensible shoes and the neutral expression of someone trained not to be charmed by anybody. I liked her immediately, which made me distrust myself. She inspected Emma's room, asked about routines, meals, bedtime, schoolwork, support systems. She watched me help with homework. She watched Emma chatter about her class pet lizard. She took notes when Tasha explained the after-school arrangement and how often she saw us. Then she asked, "Does Emma have contact with her maternal grandfather?" "Yes." "How would you describe that relationship?" I chose my words carefully. "He can be very attentive when attention serves him." Marcy paused her pen. "That's a specific answer." I learned not to be vague around men like my father. She didn't smile. "Have you ever sought counseling related to your childhood?" "Yes." "Records?" "I stopped going when my insurance changed." Another note. When she left, I worried I'd said too much. Or not enough. That became the rhythm of those weeks, second-guessing truth because lies were better dressed. Then my sister Rachel agreed to testify for Victor. That one hurt in a different place. Rachel was 4 years older than me, and had spent most of her adult life living 10 minutes from our parents while insisting she had healthy boundaries. In reality, she had a remodeled kitchen paid for by Dad after her divorce, a bookkeeping job at his friend's company, and a habit of translating his behavior into something respectable. She called me one evening after Angela forwarded the witness list. "I didn't want you to hear it from someone else," she said. "I'm looking at your name right now." A long pause. "Claire, he's worried. He's suing me. He thinks Emma needs more stability than you can give right now." I actually laughed. "Wow. Don't do that." "Do what?" "React like a human being to my own sister helping my father take my daughter?" Rachel's voice sharpened. "Nobody is trying to take Emma forever. He wants temporary custody while you get yourself together." "Myself together?" "You are drowning. I am working and parenting and grieving and being stalked through the court system by our father. You're always so dramatic about him." That sentence dropped me straight back into childhood. Rachel in the passenger seat while Dad raged at Mom. Rachel later in the bedroom saying, "He's not that bad if you don't push him." "How much is he helping you these days?" I asked quietly. Silence. Then, "That's not fair." "No? Is it also unfair that you'll walk into court and call me unstable because I cried after our mother died?" I never said. "You don't have to. He'll say it for you. You'll just stand there and nod." She exhaled hard. "I am trying to protect Emma." "No," I said. "You are protecting the system that taught you survival looks like agreement." I hung up before she could answer. That night, I found Emma sitting awake in bed though it was past 9. "Can't sleep?" I asked. She nodded. I lay beside her, staring up at the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling. After a minute she whispered, "If Grandpa had me live with him, could I still see you every day?" The room went silent around us. I turned my head slowly. "Who told you that?" She picked at the blanket. "Grandpa said maybe I'd get to stay at his house more soon, because grown-ups were figuring out what was best." A clean, cold anger moved through me. Not explosive. Worse. Precise. I sat up. "Emma, listen to me." She looked scared now, which made me soften my voice immediately. "Nothing about you is being decided without me fighting for you. Do you understand? Okay. You do not belong to the person with the bigger house. You do not belong to the person who buys more things. You are my daughter, and home is with me." Her eyes filled. "Did I do something wrong?" I pulled her against me so fast she squeaked. "No. Never." None of this is because of you. She cried into my shirt, and I held her and felt something inside me change shape. Fear was still there. But it had started hardening into something useful. The next twist came from a man I had almost forgotten how to hate. Mason called me on a Sunday afternoon. I nearly let it go to voicemail, then answered out of pure spite. What? Claire. His voice sounded shaky. Can we talk? Unless you're calling to apologize in writing for lying under oath, no. I didn't. You signed an affidavit saying I'm unstable. He exhaled hard. Your dad said it was temporary. I closed my eyes. My dad. He said if I backed him, he'd help me clear some debt and maybe make it easier for me to get back in Emma's life later. There it was. My daughter's father, once again trying to fail with efficiency. Let me get this straight, I said. You sold testimony about me in exchange for money and a hypothetical relationship with the child you already chose not to show up for. I know how it sounds. It sounds exactly like what it is. I didn't think he'd really try to cut you out. You didn't think. My voice broke on the last word, and I hated that he heard it. Do you have any idea what you've done? He was quiet for a beat. I'll recant. Will you? Yes. Under oath? Another pause. Mason. Yes. Then call my attorney. He did. Angela took his statement 2 days later. He admitted Victor had offered to pay off 3 overdue credit cards and 1 personal loan. He admitted the language in the affidavit had been drafted by Victor's lawyer. He admitted he had not seen Emma's daily life in any meaningful way for months. It should have been enough to destroy Victor's case. It wasn't. Because my father had never relied on one lie when 10 smaller ones would create a cleaner impression. Marcy, the guardian ad litem, remained cautious. She believed Emma loved me. That wasn't the issue. The issue was whether the court would see my life as too precarious compared to Victor's comfort. Rent past due once. Childcare patchwork. A mother who had cried in a pediatric waiting room after 3 bad nights of Emma's fever. A grandfather with resources, routine, and an immaculate kitchen. Class gets to wear the mask of concern more easily than struggle does. Then my younger brother called. Daniel and I hadn't had a real conversation in almost 2 years. He had spent most of his 20s pinballing between bad jobs, drinking too much, and trying desperately not to become our father while accidentally borrowing every trait except the confidence. The last I'd heard, he was in recovery and working in Lexington. When I answered, his voice was rough. I heard. From who? Rachel. I leaned against the counter. Of course. A pause. Is it true? That Dad filed for custody? Yes. No, I mean, is it as bad as I think? I laughed without humor. If you have to ask, you already know. He was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, Mom knew he'd do something like this one day. My grip tightened on the phone. What? She told me a few years ago. Said if anything ever happened to her, Dad would try to rebuild himself through Emma. Those were her words. I sat down slowly. Why didn't you tell me this? Because I thought she was just scared. And because, he blew out a breath. Because I'm not proud of how often I decided not to get involved in this family. Pain has its own hierarchy. Some betrayals cut because they're cruel. Others cut because they're weak. What else did she say? I asked. That she kept things. Notes. Copies. I don't know. She said, if Victor ever drags Claire into court, the truth is in the old house somewhere. He never sees what's right in front of him. I figured it was one of her sayings. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it. Daniel. Yeah? Why are you telling me this now? Because if he takes Emma, I'll have to live with not making this call for the rest of my life. The next day, Angela filed an emergency motion to inspect archived records related to an incident my mother once hinted at from 1998, the year I was 6. I barely remembered it clearly, just a kitchen chair on its side, my mother with a split lip claiming she'd walked into a cabinet, and my father suddenly extra affectionate for 3 weeks. The courthouse archives came back empty. No protective filing. No police attachment. No family court matter. Nothing. Angela frowned over the response. That doesn't mean it never existed. It means if it did, it's gone. Maybe from the system. She tapped the page. Your mother was old school. Women like that kept paper when institutions failed them. That became our mission. Paper. Daniel drove up that weekend. Seeing him sober and thinner, standing awkwardly in my doorway with a grocery bag and an apology in his face, nearly brought me to my knees. Hey, Claire Bear, he said softly. Nobody had called me that in years. I hugged him before I could decide not to. He was good with Emma immediately. Gentle in a way he'd had to become on purpose. He helped her build a pillow fort in the living room and let her paint his fingernails bright purple because I'm in my whimsical uncle phase. After she went to bed, he sat at my kitchen table and stared at his coffee. I used to think if I stayed gone long enough, I wouldn't belong to him anymore, he said. You don't. He looked up. Don't I? I ran from him and still turned into the kind of man who disappears when people need him. I wanted to argue. Instead I said, then don't disappear now. The next morning, while Victor was at church, Daniel and I drove to the old house. I had a key because my mother had pressed one into my hand the Christmas before she died and said, just in case your father ever locks himself out of common sense. At the time, I'd smiled and tucked it into a junk drawer. Inside, the house smelled like lemon polish and old carpets and a version of my life I had spent years outrunning. Victor hadn't changed much since Mom died. Her blue teacup still sat by the sink. Her sewing basket was still in the den. That hurt more than if everything had been gone. We searched for 4 hours. Closets. Desk drawers. Basement storage bins. The cedar chest at the foot of my parents' bed. Filing cabinets in the study. We found tax returns, church bulletins, old birthday cards, a warranty for a microwave no one owned anymore. Nothing. At one point I sat on the attic floor, sweating and furious, and said, maybe she meant metaphorically. Maybe the truth is in the walls. Maybe we're idiots. Daniel crouched by a box of Christmas decorations. Mom didn't speak in metaphors when she was scared. That stopped me. What do you mean? He held up an angel ornament and turned it in his hands. Near the end, she wasn't poetic. She was practical. Like she was trying to leave instructions without calling them instructions. We went back downstairs and looked again, differently this time. Not for hidden compartments. For habits. My mother hid cash in recipe books. She tucked doctor's reminders in hymnals. She slid important phone numbers into photo frames because, as she used to say, nobody steals family pictures. Photo frames. Albums. I stared across the den at the built-in shelves lined with family photo albums. Daniel, I said. He followed my eyes. Oh. We pulled every album down. Vacation albums. School albums. Christmas albums. A giant burgundy one from the 90s with sticky pages and brittle plastic overlays. My wedding album. Rachel's baby album. Loose stacks of duplicates my mother never got around to sorting. Halfway through, Daniel found a small indentation in the back cover of a green leather album labeled Family 2001 to 2005. Inside the lining was a slit barely visible under the fabric. My hand shook as I slid a butter knife under the edge and lifted. A folded note fell out. Then another. Then a photocopy of something stamped by the county clerk's office in 1998. I sat down so abruptly the album slipped from my lap. The note on top was in my mother's handwriting. If Victor ever tries to use court against Claire or her child, he is not doing it from love. He is doing what he always does when a woman stops obeying him. I am leaving this where he will never look because he only values photos when they make him look good. My vision blurred. Under that note was a copy of an emergency petition for temporary protection I had never seen. In it, my mother alleged that Victor had threatened to take me out of state if she ever left him, had forcibly removed me from her sister's house during an argument, and had grabbed her hard enough to leave bruising witnessed at Riverside General. There were photos. Faded, grainy, but clear enough. My mother's wrist. Her cheek. A handwritten statement from Aunt Joanne, dead 6 years now. And clipped to the back, a longer letter from my mother dated 3 weeks after the filing. He made me withdraw the complaint. He said if I didn't, he would make sure Claire remembered me as the woman who tore apart her family. If this is ever found after I'm gone, tell my daughter I am sorry I taught her endurance before I taught her escape. I broke then. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind. The kind where your body folds over grief so old it has roots. Daniel sat beside me on the floor and cried too. We take this to Angela, he said. I nodded, wiping my face with both hands. We make copies first. He almost smiled. There's my sister. We should have had everything we needed. But my father still found a way to make the next week hell. When Angela moved to admit the documents, Victor's attorney objected to authenticity, chain of custody, and relevance. He painted the materials as unverified personal writings discovered in a family residence accessible to multiple parties. Judge Hollis agreed to review them but reserved ruling. The full hearing would proceed. Then Victor came to my apartment at 8:15 at night. Not alone. With Rachel. Tasha saw them from across the hall and came out before I even opened the door fully. Victor looked at my friend like she was a stain on the wallpaper. I need a private word with my daughter. No, I said. Rachel's eyes were red. Claire, just listen. I stayed in the doorway. You have 30 seconds. Victor lowered his voice. Whatever old poison you think you found, do not drag your mother's memory through court. A chill moved over me. You know exactly what we found. His face changed for half a second. That was all. But it was enough. Rachel made a soft sound. Dad. He ignored her. Your mother was unstable toward the end. You know that. No, I said. You told us that. Repeatedly. There's a difference. His jaw clenched. If you use those papers, you will humiliate this family. I laughed in disbelief. You were suing me for my child, and you're worried about humiliation? I am worried about Emma hearing lies. Tasha stepped forward then, arms crossed. You need to leave. He looked at her like she was furniture. This is family business. No, she said. This is trespassing with a side of emotional blackmail. Rachel grabbed my father's sleeve. Dad, come on. He leaned closer to me. You don't want to do this. I met his eyes and, for the first time in my life, felt no child left in me at all. It's already done. He left. Rachel lingered 1 second longer, tears spilling now. I didn't know, she whispered. I believed that part. I just didn't know whether it mattered enough anymore. The night before the final hearing, Emma asked if she could sleep in my bed. She hadn't done that in months. I made room and she curled against me, warm and small and somehow still smelling like baby shampoo if I buried my face in her hair the right way. Mom, she whispered into the dark. Yeah? If they ask me tomorrow where I want to live, am I allowed to say you? I swallowed past the lump in my throat. Yes. What if Grandpa gets sad? I stared at the ceiling. Sweetheart, adults are responsible for their own feelings. Not yours. She thought about that. Even grown-up men? Especially grown-up men. She was quiet a moment, then said, "Grandpa always acts different when other people are around." I turned my head. "Different how?" "He gets softer. Children say the truest things with the least ceremony." "What is he like when other people aren't around?" She traced a circle on my arm with one finger. "Like he's trying not to be mad." I kissed the top of her head and held her tighter. The courtroom was colder the next morning than I remembered. Rachel sat behind Victor instead of beside him. She wouldn't look at me. Mason showed up in a borrowed suit and the expression of a man who had finally discovered shame but too late to use it well. Angela was calm. Marcy, the guardian ad litem, had filed a cautious report. Emma was bonded to me. My home was appropriate, but financial strain and ongoing conflict with Victor created concern. She stopped short of recommending a transfer, but she didn't slam the door on one either. That frightened me more than open opposition would have. Victor testified first. He was smooth. Concerned. Heartbroken. He described my recent emotional deterioration after my mother's death. He mentioned the CPS visit without admitting any involvement. He spoke of Emma's need for consistency and opportunities in his home. He said all the right things in the wrong spirit. Then Rachel testified. She cried. That was effective. She said I had been overwhelmed 4 months, that I'd always had a difficult relationship with Dad because I took things personally, that Mom had worried about me. The worst part wasn't the words. It was hearing pieces of truth arranged into a lie. Yes, I had been overwhelmed. Yes, I took things personally. People tend to do that when the things done to them are personal. Mason testified next and unraveled faster than Angela predicted. Under questioning, he admitted the payment arrangement. Admitted he hadn't visited consistently. Admitted most of his affidavit language wasn't his. Victor's attorney objected, redirected, tried to salvage credibility. But the air had shifted. Then it was my turn. Angela walked me through my work schedule, Emma's school record, her medical management, our support system, my father's history of control. She introduced the documents from my mother, subject to authentication. Victor's lawyer attacked exactly where I knew he would. "Ms. Bennett, isn't it true you have been behind on rent?" "Once, by 5 days." "Isn't it true your daughter has stayed with your neighbor while you worked late shifts?" "Yes." "In the care of a trusted adult." "Isn't it true you cried at an urgent care facility in front of your daughter?" I looked at him for a long second. "Yes." He lifted his brows like he had something. "You consider that emotionally stable?" I thought of every woman I had ever known holding too much with too little room to set it down. "Yes," I said. "I consider taking a sick child to the doctor after working all day and then crying because you're scared and tired to be human." For the first time all day, Judge Hollis looked directly at me with something like attention instead of procedure. By mid-afternoon, both sides had rested except for argument over my mother's papers. Victor's attorney insisted they were suspicious, improperly discovered, and potentially fabricated. Angela argued they were self-authenticating in part due to the clerk's stamp, corroborated by witness statements and my mother's handwriting on multiple undisputed records. Judge Hollis asked to see the originals again. Angela handed them up, along with the green photo album Daniel and I had found them in. Victor's lawyer objected. Hollis overruled him. The judge placed the album on the bench, opened the back cover, and examined the slit in the lining where the papers had been hidden. Then he looked toward Victor. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "had you seen these documents before today?" Victor's face was unreadable. "No, Your Honor." "Did you know your late wife maintained hidden storage compartments in family albums?" "No." The judge flipped through the pages. Old birthdays. Christmas mornings. My mother in a denim dress holding a younger me on her hip. Victor beside us, smiling for the camera. Then Judge Hollis stopped. "There appears to be another irregularity here." He slid his finger deeper into the album spine, deeper than Daniel and I had gone because we thought we had emptied it, and pulled free a second envelope, thinner and more brittle than the first. A visible jolt went through Victor's body. The room went dead quiet. Judge Hollis frowned at the envelope. "This one appears sealed." Angela and opposing counsel both stood. "Your Honor." He held up a hand. "The court found it in an exhibit already admitted for identification." "Sit down." He turned the envelope over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were 6 words. "If he takes her to court." I pressed my hand over my mouth. Judge Hollis looked up slowly. "Mr. Bennett, can you explain this?" Victor actually opened his mouth, then closed it. "No, Your Honor." The judge broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter, a photocopy of a deposit slip, and something else, a carbon copy of a complaint cover sheet stamped received by the county clerk nearly 28 years earlier but never entered into the digital record. Judge Hollis read in silence for what felt like an hour. Then he took off his glasses. "In 19 years on the bench," he said carefully, "I have never had an item surface mid-hearing from within a family exhibit that appears to reference a previously received but non-docketed emergency filing involving the same petitioner and a similar allegation of coercive conduct." No one moved. He looked at Angela. "Counsel, approach." Then opposing counsel. Then, after a beat, "Mr. Bennett, remain where you are." At the bench, the judge spoke in a low voice, but the courtroom was so quiet I caught pieces. Same clerk stamp format. Letter specifically anticipates custody retaliation. How this was preserved outside the record. Victor's lawyer was pale. Judge Hollis eventually returned to the record. "For transparency," he said, "the court is marking this newly discovered material as Court Exhibit 1, subject to full authentication. I am also ordering an immediate recess and directing the clerk to contact archives and, if necessary, any retired personnel able to verify whether such a filing was received and omitted from docketing." He looked directly at my father. "And I advise all parties that the contents of this letter materially affect the court's assessment of credibility." My father did something then I had not seen him do in public in years. He lost control. Not fully. Not shouting. But the mask slipped. "This is absurd," he said sharply. "My wife was sick. She wrote things when she was emotional. Are we really going to let a dead woman's paranoia decide a child's future?" The entire courtroom seemed to inhale. Judge Hollis's voice turned to stone. "Mr. Bennett, one more outburst and I will have you removed." Victor sat back, but the damage was done. There is a specific look people get when they see a familiar monster with the lights turned on. Rachel had it. Marcy had it. Even Victor's own lawyer looked like he had just discovered he was standing on rotten wood. During recess, the clerk located a retired deputy clerk who still lived in town. She reviewed a scanned image of the cover sheet and confirmed the stamp appeared genuine and from the year indicated. Angela also found a corresponding incident number in an old police archive index, even though the full report had been purged under standard retention rules. It wasn't perfect proof. It was enough. When court reconvened, Judge Hollis allowed Angela to read portions of my mother's newly discovered letter into the record. I will never forget the sound of those words in that room. "Victor does not love children more than he loves control. If Claire ever stands where I once stood, tell her that his calm is not safety. He will call her unstable because he depends on confusion to win. If he seeks custody of her child, understand that the child is not the point. Punishment is." My father stared straight ahead as if the wall itself had insulted him. Angela finished reading and sat down quietly. Victor's lawyer declined further argument. Marcy asked to amend her recommendation orally. Her voice was steady. "Based on testimony today, the child stated comfort with the respondent, the petitioners demonstrated boundary violations, and the newly introduced historical evidence bearing on coercive family dynamics. I do not believe placement with the petitioner would serve the child's best interests." That was the moment I knew I might actually get to keep breathing. Judge Hollis took 40 minutes before issuing his ruling. 40 minutes of everyone sitting under fluorescent lights while my whole life waited in a stack of paper. When he returned, he spoke slowly, like a man aware that every sentence would matter long after the room emptied. He found no basis to disturb my custodial rights. He found that my financial hardship, while real, did not equal unfitness. He found that Emma was safe, bonded, and appropriately cared for. He found Victor's petition had been supported by distorted and, in part, knowingly unreliable evidence. He denied the custody request in full. Then he did one more thing. Given the petitioner's conduct, including inappropriate communications with the minor concerning placement, attempts to leverage agency involvement, and the credibility issues raised by both present testimony and historical material, the court is ordering that any future contact between petitioner and the child occur only at the discretion of the respondent. The court further authorizes respondent to seek a civil protection order if warranted by any continued harassment. Victor stood up. Your Honor. Sit down, Mr. Bennett. He sat. Judge Hollis looked toward the clerk. I am also directing that Court Exhibit 1 and related materials be preserved and referred for administrative review regarding the non-docketed 1998 filing. Then he looked at me. Ms. Bennett, you may go home with your daughter. I didn't cry right away. For a few seconds, I couldn't feel anything at all. Then Angela squeezed my forearm, hard enough to ground me, and I folded over at the counsel table with both hands covering my face while years of fear left my body in pieces. Emma was in the waiting room with Tasha. When I came out, she took one look at me and ran. Mommy? I dropped to my knees and caught her. We're going home, I said into her hair. We're going home together. She started crying because I was crying and because children can tell when relief is bigger than words. Tasha cried too. Okay, now everybody stop before I start ugly sobbing in a government building. Even Angela laughed. Rachel approached us slowly in the hallway. She looked wrecked. Claire. I turned. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry. There are apologies that are clean and apologies that arrive wearing the dirt of what came before. Hers was the second kind. Real, maybe. Late, definitely. I know, I said. That was all I had for her then. Victor came through the doors a minute later with his attorney. He looked smaller somehow, though maybe that was just the first honest scale I had ever used. He met my eyes. No apology. No softness. Just fury with nowhere left to hide. I looked away first, not because I was afraid, but because he was finally no longer the most important thing in the room. The protection order came 2 weeks later after he left me 2 voicemails and sent Rachel to ask whether he could explain himself to Emma. No. The judge granted the order without much drama. Victor's attorney withdrew from further representation. Rachel started therapy. Daniel stayed in town longer than planned and came by every Sunday with groceries he pretended were accidentally too many from Costco. Mason sent a letter asking to rebuild a relationship with Emma the right way this time. I told him maybe someday, with consistency and a lot of humility, but not yet. As for me, I did what women do when the storm passes and the dishes are still in the sink. I kept going. But not the same way. I applied for a certification program in medical coding that came with better pay. Kevin rearranged my schedule so I could attend evening classes twice a week. Tasha celebrated by bringing over a cake that said hot single MOM with boundaries and blue frosting. Emma thought that was the funniest thing she had ever seen. We moved 3 months later to a small duplex farther west with a patch of yard out back and a school bus stop at the corner. The rent was still too high for my taste, but the windows didn't rattle and the kitchen had enough counter space for Emma to sit and do homework while I cooked. The first night there, she stood in her new room, new paint, same rabbit, same books, and said, "This feels happy." I sat on the floor beside the half-unpacked boxes and smiled. It does. In October, Daniel came with us to visit my mother's grave. The cemetery was quiet except for wind moving through the trees. Emma carried 3 daisies because she said Grandma Diane should have something cheerful. I knelt in the grass and brushed leaves from the headstone. "Hi, Mom," I said, and my voice trembled in spite of everything. "We're okay." That wasn't fully true. Healing isn't a light switch. There were still nights I woke up from dreams where somebody was knocking and I couldn't get to the door fast enough. There were still moments when Emma mentioned Grandpa and I felt my spine lock. There were still questions about what my mother endured that I would never get to ask her directly. But okay can mean not destroyed. Okay can mean the story did not end where someone else wanted it to. Emma placed the daisies down carefully. "Thank you for helping us," she whispered to the stone. I closed my eyes for a second. On the drive home, she asked from the back seat, "Do you think Grandma was brave?" I looked out at the road ahead. "Yes," I said. "I think she was brave in ways people didn't always notice." Emma considered that. "Like you?" The answer rose in my throat and got stuck there. I glanced at her in the mirror. "I'm trying." She smiled and went back to looking out the window. That's the thing I learned through all of it. People think courage is loud because fear is. They think bravery arrives as a speech or a dramatic escape or a perfect ending with music under it. Most of the time, it doesn't. Most of the time, courage is paperwork and witness lists and showing up in clean clothes when your hands won't stop shaking. It's telling your child the truth in words they can carry. It's accepting help from the people who give it without asking you to become smaller in return. It's refusing to confuse control with care just because control comes in nicer packaging. For a long time, I thought surviving my father meant getting far enough away from him that his voice couldn't reach me. I understand now that real freedom was learning not to hear his version of me as the final one. He wanted custody of my daughter because men like him cannot stand the idea that love exists outside their authority. He wanted the story to end with him restored, respectable, needed, central. Instead, it ended with a judge holding my mother's hidden truth in his hands and seeing what I had seen my whole life, that some people don't protect children. They protect their power. And power, no matter how polished, is a poor substitute for love. Emma is 9 now. She still loves strawberry yogurt. She still asks hard questions. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she crawls into my bed and says, "Tell me a true story from when I was little." So I tell her the ones that matter. I tell her about the time she insisted on wearing rain boots to the grocery store in July. The time she cried because a butterfly landed on someone else. The time she looked at me in the middle of the worst year of my life and, without knowing it, gave me the one thing I needed most, someone worth being unbreakable for. And one day, when she's old enough, I'll tell her the whole story. Not to make her afraid. But so she knows. Home is not the biggest house. Family is not the loudest claim. And the people who love you should never need to make you feel small in order to keep you close. If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy meaningful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more.